10 square miles of the Ionian Sea, choked with burning timber and drifting oars. 230 warships, the finest Rome ever put to water, reduced to wreckage before a legionary could even finish his evening meal. Survivors who dragged themselves onto the rocks, near Actium, would spend the rest of their lives trying to explain what they witnessed. Most of them settled on the same word: God, a god of thunder that needed no wind, and left nothing behind but fire on the water. But rewind that morning, picture an oarsman on one of Antony's galleys, third bench from the stern, pulling his stroke in rhythm with thousands of others. He can see the enemy forming across the strait. He knows the stakes. Whoever holds this water holds the known world. Now, drop something into his line of sight that has no business existing for another 20 centuries. A gray steel wall, rising 18 stories from the sea, longer than 3 of his ships, laid bow to stern, cutting through the water at a speed his galley could never reach, even if Poseidon himself were at the oars. No sails, no oars, no visible reason it should be moving at all. The USS Gerald R. Ford, 100,000 tons of nuclear-powered sovereign territory, from 2022, carrying 5,000 crew, and enough ordnance to unmake civilizations. Not over years, but in a single afternoon. Rome conquered the ancient world by mastering every weapon it ever encountered. But what happens when the thing sitting across the water isn't a weapon? Something you can study, copy, or even begin to comprehend. Honestly, what would you call it? Every warship, anchored off that Greek coastline, exists because somebody wanted something they didn't have. Strip the bronze rams, the archers, the catapults, hurling 50-pound stones, and what remains is a price tag for ambition. Rome didn't perfect the quinquereme out of curiosity. 5 banks of oars, each pulled by a man who would never see a denarius of the wealth his labor protected. That engineering guaranteed Egyptian grain and Sicilian wheat, and Spanish silver kept flowing toward whoever sat at the top. At Actium, 2 men both believed they were that person. Antony didn't station 230 warships here because he loved the Republic. Cleopatra's treasury was the richest on earth, and her bed came with it. Control Egypt. Control the grain that feeds Rome. Control the grain, and every senator, every legionary eats from your hand. That is not strategy. That is ownership of a civilization's stomach. Octavian read the same ledger from the opposite column. He didn't need Egypt's gold. He needed Antony not to have it. A rival with unlimited funding and a foreign queen producing heirs wasn't a political inconvenience. It was existential. So he built his fleet and sailed south to settle the only question that ever mattered: who keeps everything? Now, drop a 100,000-ton nuclear carrier into that same water, built 2 millennia later for the exact same naked reason, projecting one nation's will over every ocean. And the symmetry gets incredibly uncomfortable. Which empire handed this kind of firepower? Do you think would have actually shown restraint? A lookout on the flagship spots something gray on the horizon. Protocol says, "Call it up the chain, officer to captain, captain to admiral." By the time his mouth opens, 2 shapes faster than anything alive have crossed the formation and vanished. Chain of command needs time. Time is a resource Rome no longer owns. Then the sound arrives, not war horns. A crack that hits the ribcage like a stone wall. Oarsmen release their oars, not cowardice. Their hands simply stop obeying. Horses on transport barges throw riders into the water. Veterans who held shields against Parthian charges grab rigging like drowning men. Discipline forged over centuries dissolves in one heartbeat. Because discipline only answers threats you can categorize. And this threat has absolutely no category. Here is the institutional poison. Rome built the finest military logistics network antiquity ever produced. Supply chains spanning the Mediterranean. 70,000 soldiers staged on land. 230 warships coordinated by flags and muscle. Every component assumed the enemy operates under the same physical laws. Remove that assumption and the machine doesn't slow. It seizes. Officers can't issue orders for situations. No doctrine covers. Admirals can't reposition against what they can't track. Centuries of protocol become dead weight in under 60 seconds. 7 ships reduced to scattered flame in under 60 seconds. And the worst part wasn't the dying. It was the deciding. Antony's officers, the finest naval commanders alive, split into 2 camps in the exact same heartbeat. half screamed to tighten formation. Lock shields the way Rome had always locked shields, while the other half broke for open water. Both responses were textbook. Both were catastrophically wrong. When a threat arrives from outside your entire framework, training doesn't just fail you, it actively kills you. The Romans who closed ranks made themselves a denser target. The ones who scattered became easier to isolate. Every instinct they had spent decades sharpening became the mechanism of their own destruction. Now, pull that image forward 2,000 years. In 2010, a flash crash erased nearly $1 trillion in 36 minutes. Traders did exactly what their training demanded. Some doubled down, others dumped everything. Both moves fed the collapse. The algorithms behind it operated in a dimension human reflexes couldn't touch, couldn't counter, couldn't even describe until weeks afterward. The parallel isn't poetic, it is structural. Antony watched fire consume a fleet that had no word for air attack. Floor traders watched numbers plummet at speeds no human instinct could match. Neither system broke because people were incompetent. It broke because competence had an expiration date. Nobody bothered to check. So what is the formation you're tightening right now? The reflex you trust so completely you've never questioned it. That might already be the wrong answer. To something you haven't even learned to name yet? Drop that one in the comments. So here is the verdict that only our century is equipped to deliver. The Ford wins, elimination level. No contest, not even close wins. And it changes absolutely nothing. That is the part worth sitting with. 2,500 tons of precision ordnance, 90 aircraft, a floating city powered by split atoms, and the strategic outcome is identical to tossing a lit match into the ocean. The fire is real. The ocean doesn't care. Stand on the flight deck the morning after Actium and do the math a modern logistics officer would do. Every tomahawk leaving its tube is a line item that can never be restocked. Every pound of jet fuel burned is a pound subtracted from a total that no refinery on Earth will produce for another 20 centuries. The crew eats through provisions on a schedule designed for ports. That won't exist until long after every person aboard is dust. Rome, meanwhile, still has 28 legions garrisoned across a landmass wider than most modern nations. It still has fortified cities built to outlast siege engines, not guided munitions. But the principle holds. You can't starve a continent from a single ship. And then there is the question no war college simulation ever had to answer before. Whose side is the carrier on? Octavian and Antony are both Roman. Choosing one isn't liberation. It is intervention in a family argument. With a weapon, neither family member can comprehend, which means neither can negotiate with it, or surrender to it, or even write a treaty acknowledging it exists. 40 minutes. That is how long it took to erase a fleet from the ancient world. And Rome carried on. It always does. 2,000 years pass, and we park a floating nation over someone else's war, calling it an answer.